I cut my flats and my top wall logs in place. This was very difficult working from the ladder. Here, I am squaring up my ceiling boards I cut with my sawmill. I'd leave live edge on one side, then when I ran the board through my table saw, I'd utilize as much of the tree as possible. Also, this made every board a different size, which looks really good. After the boards were run through the table saw, we would use a router to make shiplap joints so if the boards move or shrank, you wouldn't be able to see my foam insulation behind it. These boards were cut on the sawmill the prior 2 winters, and they were stacked and stickered so they could dry. When I pulled the tarp off of them to use them, I was bummed out because the boards had weathered. But after getting several of them up, it actually made it look awesome. To cut my ends straight, I used an old chainsaw mill for making beams. This worked real good. I also used it to cut my doors out. Here you can see I use seal plate foam on my top wall logs and have vapor barrier on my gable walls that will overlap my ceiling boards. This worked well and kept my ceiling pretty airtight. After a long day's work, we dropped the boys off upriver with their kayaks.
There's such me. You didn't even see it. Is that fun?
We ended up only having enough ceiling boards for the interior of the cabin. So for the covered deck and the overhang in the back, we had to fire up the sawmill again.
I'm actually stuck. Hold on.
Rocco just got them.
I used 2x8s for my rafters, and the foam was pre-cut at home to fit between the rafters with a hot wire. Here I am cutting out the side door. Before we could install all of the foam, we had to pull all of the wire for the interior lights and mount all of the boxes in the ceiling. I built this wood stove from a piece of 24-inch pipe. The door handle is part of the antler from the first moose I ever shot. This summer, I also pounded an 1.25 inch well. Here we are developing it by blowing air down it. We weren't sure if we were going to have a front door or if we would just have our decks wrap around. Because of this, rebar was pounded here, which made it interesting cutting this opening. This trip, we brought up metal roofing for one side of the cabin. We couldn't put the roofing on the other side until the covered deck was built. Here, I'm trying to figure out what my roof line is going to look like over my covered porch. This was a very hot day, so we took the boys, Owen and my nephew Jesse, down to the gravel bar for a swim, and I drank an ice cold beer. My mom and dad were able to come up for a couple days to help me frame my front deck and my side porch. I don't have any video of me cutting and installing the splines in the doors and windows, but you can see them here. I use 1/4 inch by 2 inch angle iron. This allows me to attach my door and window frames to the angle iron, allowing the logs to shrink and slide down the angle iron with no hang-ups. Here I am finishing my roof over my covered porch. When I'm done, this will be a screened-in porch. Before I could put my roofing on, I needed to cut my ends off my ridge pole and purlins. I wasn't able to get a square cut from on top of the roof, so I did it from the ladder. It was a little sketchy when the purlin end fell. This trip, we brought up the rest of the roofing. It was so awesome to finally have this cabin shedding water. Here, I'm using a 4.5-inch angle grinder with 50 to 80 grit sanding discs to clean up my bevels around my doors and windows. We used an Osborne wheel on the entire cabin so that the log pores would open and the logs would accept the log oil. After we were done Osborne wheeling, we used a leaf blower and air compressor to blow all of the dust out of the logs. We used Defy Extreme Wood Stain. The color is cedar tone. I built both doors with lumber cut on my sawmill from trees on the property. On the interior walls, we used a water-based satin wood sheen. This was my dog Rocco's last summer with us.